You can tell a lot about a culture from the jokes it runs into the ground. For the past decade, one of those jokes has been the rise of the term bro. Tech bro, gym bro, film bro, lit bro. You name it, we've broified it. Something annoys you? Craft beer, CrossFit. People who talk about blockchain at brunch. You don't have to explain why. You just stick bro on the end and suddenly it feels like a trend, maybe even a social problem. Dan Brooks, writing in The Atlantic, has a lovely line about this. He says the bro trope has become a reliable and lazy way to elevate pet peeves into trends, which is exactly right. It lets us turn our irritations into a demographic. Think about how that works. If I say, hazy IPAs should be stopped, you're allowed to ask me for evidence. What's wrong with the beer? But if I say, I'm so sick of beer bros, and I give you a little sketch, flat-billed caps, sunglasses on top, lecturing women about hops, it lands differently. Suddenly I'm not just being grumpy, I'm sort of doing feminism. I'm hinting there's something sexist in the mix, without having to spell out what it is. Brooks walks through this with example after example. The lit bro who worships David Foster Wallace and Jonathan Franzen and tries to convert dates at the bar. The tech bro in his black vest and white trainers pushing up rents while he stands in the falafel shop staring at his phone. The point isn't that literature or technology or even hazy IPAs are bad. The point is those guys. And notice they are guys. As Brooks says, in theory you could have a female bro. But in practice, when people complain about bros, they mean men. The word quietly plugs your annoyance into this big fuzzy sense that masculinity is problematic, not evil exactly, just suspicious, a little off. The move is powerful because it's vague. You don't have to say what the tech sector is doing to cities. You just say, tech bros ruined my neighborhood, and the case feels half-made. Masculinity plus something already a bit sketchy, startups, venture capital, scooters, creates a kind of compound suspicion. So this episode isn't really about whether lit bros are annoying. They are, but that's not the point. The interesting thing is what happens when a word like bro stops being just a label for certain men and starts to seep into how we organize work, health, housing, everything. Because underneath the meme, there's a code. A set of expectations about what a proper man is meant to be like. Stoic, resilient, self-managing, a bit reckless when the occasion demands it. For a while, that code mostly lived in frat houses, locker rooms, and certain corners of the internet. Over time, it's crept into slide decks and product briefs and city plans. So here's the question for today. What happens when a meme about guys becomes a design brief for systems? When bro goes from a joke about someone at the bar to the hidden setting our institutions are quietly optimized for? That's what I want to trace, how the architecture of bro got built, who it serves, and who ends up living in the cracks. If you rewind a bit, say early 2000s, the word bro calls up a pretty specific picture. You can probably see him. There's a baseball cap. There's protein powder somewhere nearby. There's a group chat with far too many GIFs. But I want you to think of that bro not as a person exactly, but as a code of behavior. A set of rules about what you're allowed to show and what you absolutely must not. On one side, you've got the disciplined bro. He's up early, no excuses, smashing his step count, tracking macros, listening to podcasts at 2x speed because, optimize everything. It's all about the grind. You earn status by improving yourself visibly. On the other side, there's his reckless cousin. This is send it energy, blackout stories, shots you definitely didn't need, jumping off the roof into the pool because someone yelled, "Don't be soft." The whole point here is not overthinking. Prove you can throw yourself into chaos and walk away smiling. What's clever, if that's the word, is that the bro code says you should do both. Work hard, party hard, be ruthlessly controlled Monday to Friday, and then completely unhinged on Saturday night. And the real flex is, look, I can take it. My body, my schedule, my nerves, I can push all of it and still show up. Underneath that, there are really two axes. First is control versus chaos. You're either dialing everything in or you're blowing off steam, but both are allowed. In fact, you sort of need both to qualify. Being only disciplined is a bit robotic. Being only chaotic is just a mess. The ideal bro can flick between the two. The second axis is much harsher. Care versus the refusal of care. And here the rule is simple. Feeling is fine. Needing is not. You can show effort. You can show physical pain. Actually, that's kind of a badge of honor. Limping around after leg day, telling everyone how ruined you are, that's good content. But you cannot show vulnerable emotional need. You can't say I'm scared or I'm lonely or I have no idea what I'm doing with my life. So the feelings have to wear disguises. Affection has to come out as insult. Hey idiot, I love you rather than I care about you. Worry about a mate turns into, you've been quiet, you little weirdo, what's up? Followed by a shove. If anyone drifts toward therapy language, I felt really anxious when the group yanks them back with a joke. What's going on there? Well, over time, societies build these pictures of what a real man looks like. Tough, in control, emotionally contained. We tell those stories so often in films, in sport, in family law, that they start to feel like common sense, not a choice, just the way things are. And young men pick that up from each other. You don't need some grand patriarch at the front of the room saying, don't cry. You only need the threat of the eye roll, the screenshot of your earnest text message in the group chat, the nickname that sticks because you opened up once at 3 a.m. So when we talk about bros, we're really talking about this shared performance. It's not what's going on inside any particular man's head. Inside, there might be all sorts of tenderness and fear. But publicly, the game is stay controlled or deliberately wild, never be soft. And that matters because once a code like that is established, it doesn't just shape individuals. It starts to shape what looks sensible in other contexts. It becomes the invisible background assumption when people design workplaces, apps, even city blocks. If toughness and self-reliance feel like the natural baseline for men, they start to feel like the natural baseline for humans. And that is where things get interesting and a bit dangerous. Once you see the bro code, control over chaos, toughness over visible care, you start spotting it in places that don't look bro-y at all. No red solo cups, no frat house, just policy documents, office layouts, app interfaces. Let's start at work. Cast your mind back to the pandemic. Overnight, millions of knowledge workers went home with a laptop and a hope that the Wi-Fi would hold. It was messy, but a lot of organizations discovered something awkward. People could get plenty done without being physically watched. Then, as offices reopened, we saw this wave of very rigid return-to-office mandates. 3, 4, 5 days a week on site, badge swipes tracked, camera on quietly becoming the default again. The official story was always about culture and collaboration. We just work better together in person. But underneath you can hear the control axis humming away. Being seen equals being committed. Sitting in the right building at the right time is proof you care. Flexibility becomes a perk for the exceptional, not a basic design feature. And when people start fraying under that, long commutes, childcare, jigsaw puzzles, the simple exhaustion of pretending we've gone back to 2019, the response in many places is resilience training, have a mindfulness app. Here's a webinar about managing stress, maybe a branded water bottle. In other words, the institution stays the same. The individual is asked to get tougher inside it. That's pure bro code. You don't question the system. You optimize yourself. You see a similar move in health and wellness tech. Self-tracking is sold as empowerment. Strap on a watch and suddenly you've got your step count, your sleep score, your heart rate variability. You can optimize your day down to the minute. And look, that can be genuinely useful. If you discover you sleep terribly after late-night email, that's good information. But slowly, the framing shifts. Health stops being a shared responsibility between you, your community, your workplace, your healthcare system, and becomes a personal discipline project. If you're exhausted, the first question becomes, did you follow your plan? Did you close your rings? If your blood sugar isn't great, were you tracking properly? Some employers and insurers have even tied rewards to this. Hit your movement goals, pay a bit less, don't hit them, or that's on you. Again, care is redefined as self-monitoring. If you're not thriving, maybe you just didn't grind hard enough at your own well-being. Now zoom out to housing and cities. New developments these days don't just sell granite countertops, they sell self-sufficiency, private security, backup generators, on-site water and co-working, gyms, even private microgrids. The brochure pitch is, behind these gates, you'll be fine, whatever chaos is happening out there. It's resilience as a luxury good. Instead of investing in the messy, shared infrastructure of a city, public transport, flood defenses, social care, you buy out, you wall off. You live in what one urbanist called fortress urbanism, except now it's dressed up in the language of sustainability and wellness. Stick those three examples together, work, health, housing, and you get a pattern. The ideal user of the system is someone with high stamina, few care responsibilities, a lot of comfort with self-management, and a belief that life is basically an optimization game. In other words, the perfect citizen is kind of a bro, not necessarily male, not literally wearing a backwards cap, but living by the same script. Control yourself, tolerate stress, rely on your own little fortress, and try not to need too much from anyone else. Designers have this phrase I really like, the default user. It's the invisible person every product or policy is secretly built around. The app doesn't say, this was designed for a 32-year-old guy who never leaves his phone, but if that's who it works best for, he's the default. You can spot the default user by watching who keeps having to ask for exceptions. If you're always the one emailing HR about flexible hours or fighting with an app that can't imagine your body or your schedule, you are not the default. Historically, we've seen very literal versions of this. Early crash test dummies were based on an average male body, so seatbelts and airbags fitted that body better. Women and smaller people were statistically less protected. Early voice recognition systems were trained mostly on male voices, so they misheard others more often. No one set out to exclude, they just treated one experience as normal. Bro-coded systems do the same thing, but with everyday life. The default worker is someone with no small children to pick up at 4:30, no parent with dementia calling 3 times a day, no chronic illness that flares without warning. They can stay late at short notice, travel at the drop of a hat, answer messages at all hours, and bounce back from stress with a cold shower and a motivational quote. If that's you, if you're young, healthy, unencumbered, the system feels efficient. Demanding, maybe, but fair. For everyone else, there's a hidden tax. Parents know this intimately. School runs, sick days, the endless forms and WhatsApp groups, these don't show up on any company spreadsheet, but they're very real. When meetings are always at 5 p.m., when team building means overnight offsites, somebody is scrambling. Often that somebody is a woman, because our broader gender norms still quietly assume she'll pick up the care work. People caring for partners or aging relatives feel it too. They can absolutely do the job. What they don't have is the spare capacity for last-minute schedule changes or the emotional headroom to absorb constant just push through it messaging. Then there are people living with chronic illness. Health systems like to talk about self-management now. Track your symptoms, follow the plan, stay on top of the portal. For some, that's empowering. For others, it's an administrative job layered on top of already being ill. When they can't keep up, it's easy for professionals and for the patients themselves to slip into "I failed at my care" rather than "this system never imagined someone at my energy level." And finally, there are people who simply prefer a slower, more relational way of living. They want time for neighbors, for long conversations, for community rituals that don't scale or optimize well. They're not lazy. They just don't buy the idea that every hour should be maximized for output. In a bro-coded world, that choice is expensive. You can absolutely step off the hamster wheel, take a less intense job, move somewhere quieter, limit your availability, but you'll probably earn less, spend more on support, and watch certain doors close. The architecture of Bro doesn't ban these lives, it just makes them edge cases. You can hear that in the language. If you need something different, you're asking for an accommodation, a special arrangement. The baseline, the thing that supposedly needs no justification, is the grind. Everything else is deviation. Codes don't disappear because someone writes a clever think piece about them. They change when enough people quietly decide this isn't working. And there are signs the Bro architecture is under strain. Let's go back to work for a moment. The reaction to rigid return to office rules has not just been a bit of muttering. We've seen organized petitions, leaked Slack messages, open letters spelling out why 5 days under fluorescent lights makes no sense after several years of successful hybrid work. What people are saying underneath the corporate jargon is pretty simple. I'm willing to work hard. I'm not willing to pretend that sitting at this particular desk is the only way to prove it. The idea that sheer physical presence equals commitment, the control axis of the Bro code, is losing its naturalness. It feels arbitrary now, not obvious. Hustle culture is showing cracks too. That whole 2010s aesthetic, rise and grind, sleep when you're dead, coffee as a food group, is getting more side-eye than admiration. You see trends like quiet quitting or the so-called lazy girl job, which under the silliness are mostly people saying, I'll do my work, but I'm not sacrificing every other part of my life to the company. Among men, there are small but telling shifts. One of the classic Bro moves has been using therapy talk as a joke. Mate needs therapy as a punchline, not a suggestion. But if you listen to how younger men, say under 35, talk online and in interviews, there's a bit more plain speech creeping in. Yeah, I see a therapist. I had a panic attack before that match. I checked in on my friend because he seemed off. High-profile figures talking this way matters. When a champion swimmer or a superstar gymnast says, I stepped back for my mental health, or I'm in treatment for depression, without wrapping it in irony, they shift the boundaries of what's sayable. Suddenly, caring for your mind is not the opposite of being strong. It's part of how you stay in the game. You can see countercurrents in cities too. The idea of the 15-minute city, where most of what you need is a short walk or bike ride away, has moved from urbanist fantasy into actual planning documents. It's a design rooted in interdependence, good pavements, local shops, shared green spaces. Your well-being depends on the neighborhood working, not your private compound having a generator. And while the luxury, gated model is still dominant in many places, we're also seeing experiments at the edges, co-housing, community land trusts, buildings where residents share childcare or tools or even meals. They're small, often precarious projects, but they point toward a different idea of resilience, one based on networks, not walls. Some workplaces are making similar moves. Instead of treating flexibility as something you earn after proving your loyalty, they're baking it in from day one. Normalizing sentences like, I'm at capacity, or I need backup on this, and then actually responding with help rather than a black mark. Evaluating managers not just on output, but on whether their teams burn out or stay healthy. None of this means the Bro code has vanished. You can still open social media and be told you're a failure if you haven't optimized your morning routine, your body fat percentage, and your side hustle. But the spell is weaker. A growing number of people have experienced alternatives, often by necessity during the pandemic, and they're less willing to treat grind and isolation as the obvious price of being a serious adult. Those cracks are opportunities. They're moments when we can ask, quite practically, if the old script isn't working for as many people, what might we build instead? So where does all this leave us? I'm not going to argue we should get rid of discipline or autonomy. Most of us, if we're honest, like feeling capable and in control some of the time. The problem isn't those values, it's the way they've been defined against openness and interdependence, as if you can be strong or you can need people, but never both. If you're in any kind of position to set rules, designing products, running a team, writing policy, one useful question is, which part of the code are we energizing here? Are we rewarding nothing but stoic self-management, or are we making room for honest limits and shared responsibility? Take a workplace. When someone says, "I'm struggling," what actually happens next? Do they get routed towards support, lighter workload for a bit, extra hands, clarity on priorities? Or do they quietly acquire a reputation problem, not a team player, not leadership material? Look at the everyday language you normalize is, "I'm at capacity," treated as responsible planning or as whining. Do senior people ever say out loud, "I can't take that on right now"? That single sentence from the right mouth can do more to change a culture than a dozen slide decks about well-being. In product land, ask who your default user is. If you're building a health app, is it designed for someone whose energy is steady and whose day is mostly theirs to arrange? Or can it handle the reality of flare-ups, night shifts, school runs? Are the "I need help" options as visible and easy as the "set a new record" prompts? For housing and cities, test your idea of resilience. How much of the budget goes into individual fortifications, extra locks, private generators, and how much into things people share? Courtyards, local clinics, reliable buses, community centres that stay open in a heat wave. Does your safe development encourage neighbours to actually meet, or does it simply keep them from ever needing one another? None of this requires a grand moral lecture. One of the more practical tricks here is to translate care into the language of competence. Emotional literacy, conflict resolution, knowing when to rest, these are skills. They can be taught, measured, rewarded. When a high-status man says, "Therapy made me a better leader," he hasn't stopped valuing discipline. He's just expanded what counts as disciplined. When a company treats making time to mentor or to cover for a colleague with caring duties as part of the job, not a nice extra that's still about performance. It's just a broader, truer version of what performance is. In the end, we need a slightly different vocabulary of strength, one where asking for help or coordinating with others or investing in shared infrastructure are seen as signs you understand how the world actually works, not signs you've failed at rugged individualism, because systems built only for the endlessly resilient, always available, permanently optimized person are brittle. They work brilliantly for a narrow window of life when you're young, healthy, unencumbered, and then crack the moment illness hits, a baby arrives, a parent needs you, or frankly, you just age. The architecture of Bro gave us offices, apps, and neighborhoods tuned to that narrow band. Understanding how that happened isn't about blaming individual men in baseball caps. It's about seeing the code so we can write another one. And that's really the project of this episode. To notice the little cultural memes, the bros, the hustle quotes, the wellness mantras that quietly sneak into blueprints, and to ask how we might design something kinder and more realistic in their place. Changing who the default user is allowed to be is not a soft ask. Given what the current design is costing, it may be the most practical thing on the table. So where does all this leave us? I'm not going to argue we should get rid of discipline or autonomy. Most of us, if we're honest, like feeling capable and in control some of the time. The problem isn't those values. It's the way they've been defined against openness and interdependence, as if you can be strong or you can need people, but never both. If you're in any kind of position to set rules, designing products, running a team, writing policy, one useful question is, which part of the code are we energizing here? Are we rewarding nothing but stoic self-management, or are we making room for honest limits and shared responsibility? Take a workplace. When someone says, "I'm struggling," what actually happens next? Do they get routed towards support, lighter workload for a bit, extra hands, clarity on priorities? Or do they quietly acquire a reputation problem, not a team player, not leadership material? Look at the everyday language you normalize. Is "I'm at capacity" treated as responsible planning or as whining? Do senior people ever say out loud, "I can't take that on right now"? That single sentence, from the right mouth, can do more to change a culture than a dozen slide decks about well-being. In product land, ask who your default user is. If you're building a health app, is it designed for someone whose energy is steady and whose day is mostly theirs to arrange? Or can it handle the reality of flare-ups, night shifts, school runs? Are the "I need help" options as visible and easy as the "set a new record" prompts? For housing and cities, test your idea of resilience. How much of the budget goes into individual fortifications, extra locks, private generators, and how much into things people share? Courtyards, local clinics, reliable buses, community centres that stay open in a heat wave? Does your safe development encourage neighbours to actually meet, or does it simply keep them from ever needing one another? None of this requires a grand moral lecture. One of the more practical tricks here is to translate care into the language of competence. Emotional literacy, conflict resolution, knowing when to rest, these are skills. They can be taught, measured, rewarded. When a high-status man says, "Therapy made me a better leader," he hasn't stopped valuing discipline. He's just expanded what counts as disciplined. When a company treats making time to mentor or to cover for a colleague with caring duties as part of the job, not a nice extra that's still about performance, it's just a broader, truer version of what performance is. In the end, we need a slightly different vocabulary of strength. One where asking for help or coordinating with others or investing in shared infrastructure are seen as signs you understand how the world actually works, not signs you've failed at rugged individualism. Because systems built only for the endlessly resilient, always available, permanently optimized person are brittle. They work brilliantly for a narrow window of life, when you're young, healthy, unencumbered, and then crack the moment illness hits, a baby arrives, a parent needs you, or, frankly, you just age. The architecture of Bro gave us offices, apps, and neighborhoods tuned to that narrow band. Understanding how that happened isn't about blaming individual men in baseball caps. It's about seeing the code so we can write another one. And that's really the project of this episode. To notice the little cultural memes, the bros, the hustle quotes, the wellness mantras that quietly sneak into blueprints, and to ask how we might design something kinder and more realistic in their place. Changing who the default user is allowed to be is not a soft ask. Given what the current design is costing, it may be the most practical thing on the table.